and welcome to another exciting episode of The Energy That Surrounds Us. I'm your host, Michael, and I am joined today to do part two because our time was cut short and there was so much more we wanted to ask this guest, so he has graciously agreed to come back on. And so, without further ado, I give you Robert Lindsy Milne.
Thank you, Michael. I was watching the intro. That was spectacular. Congratulations.
Thank you. My cousin does that for me, and
Wow. Salute.
yeah. And the beautiful thing about it is he's not even really into the field. He does ads for his mom with her stuff, and
Sure.
I said, "Can you make an intro?" And
Yeah.
when I saw that, I was like, "Dude, this is it. You nailed it."
It is really nice.
Well, thank you. And
Yes.
so, one of the things we were talking about backstage that Robert and I were talking about was when you were sick this year and had taken time off, that you were working on rebuilding your gift. And I had mentioned about my leg. And
Yes.
so, do you want to touch up on the how you were rebuilding your gift before I share my part?
Well, or let's talk about yours first. Do you have your, but which one would you like me to do?
You're the guest, so I'll
Okay.
leave it to you.
All right. So, firstly, I don't think of myself as gifted. I don't think I have a gift. What I think I have is a skill that I've committed, dedicated myself to, and I celebrate. Coming January 17th, incidentally, I celebrate 59 years of being a professional psychic. It's been my life's calling. Um, I've dedicated my life to it, and it's a whole part of me, but not a gift. It's a talent that I've worked really hard at.
I can respect that, and I can see where you're coming from.
And if anybody puts as much energy into the skill, as I put into the skill that I have, they would be as good or better in the field that they would put their energy into than I am. So it's just a question of putting the time, energy, I think.
Now that makes perfect sense. It's kind of like
Sure.
a muscle, and
Yes.
so my part that I was sharing with you was a few years ago I had broken my leg and had two metal plates and
How
screws.
did you do that, by the way?
I was on, so I was volunteering at a performing arts center, and they have terrazzo flooring,
Yes.
and I was going down the steps, and apparently I was going so fast I missed 5 steps altogether and landed on my leg.
Wow.
Yeah, and the orthopedic, when he came in and looked at it, he goes, "So where was the car? Because this is like a car accident." And I said,
Wow.
"No, it was on a stairwell. I was in a building." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And so he was like, "Well, I'll try and put it back together." And he's like, "I'm sure I can do it." And he goes, "Good thing is there's no ligament damage, no tendon damage, or muscle damage." I was like, "Okay, well, that's good." And then I remember as he's wheeling me back for the first surgery, he goes, "I hope I can save your leg." And I'm like, wait, how did we get to that point?
Wow.
But he finished and was like, he goes, I was able to put the joint back perfectly together. You have 2 metal plates and about, I think it was 9 to 12 screws put in to hold it in place. And so I was having then to go into physical therapy and learn to walk.
Mm-hmm.
And I was discussing with you on how it was like 2 to 3 months in physical therapy. And in the beginning of the physical therapy, it's like I would come home crying and frustrated at no end because I'm like, it was in my late 30s, I believe, early 40s when this happened. And I'm like, I've been walking for 30, 40 years now. Why can't I walk now? And and I was explaining with you that I was saying, I had to realize it's not that the muscles are damaged or the bone is damaged. It's getting the muscles to release the fear that they're damaged.
Oops. I am here. I just pressed the wrong button. Are you there?
You're still here.
Yes. Okay. I just have to, I accidentally pressed a button on my computer. Please keep talking and I'll be right there. I have to put in the code.
Okay. And so, yeah, and it was frustrating to no end to sit there and be like, this is something I've done every day without thinking about. And now I got to sit here and retrain the muscle to put weight on it and accept that it's fine. And it was like a major undertaking. And I finally, the week of going on a cruise to Hawaii, got cleared by physical therapy enough to walk with crutches. And the beauty of the story is, so we end up making our connection to Hawaii. The cruise ship had to wait for us because of delay in the flight through them. That's why they waited. Then getting to, I believe it was Maui, and going snuba. It's snorkeling and scuba combined. And to make the story short, when I held the dirt on the bottom of the ocean in the bay, I got up and realized we get back to the ship. I'm walking to dinner with no crutches, and my leg is totally fine. It's accepted everything. And it was just a transformational moment that it was like, wow, I don't know what happened, but it was like something flicked the switch, and all of a sudden it was back to normal, as normal was for me.
How you doing now?
Now it's every once in a while I'll feel it, like with weather, or if I'm pushing myself too hard to do something or crawling somewhere in short spaces. It's like, nope, my leg's like, okay, that's enough of this. Stand up.
Do you think that at least part of that transformation was you actually manifesting it?
It could be because I have a habit of like the proverbial burning both ends till it's like, and then the body, when it gets too weak, will either I'll start to feel sick, and so I'm forced to take time.
Sure.
And so it could be that the body just was like, we need a major break, and literally gave me a major break and caused me to stop and relook at things.
Sure. I found that to be so in many of the experiences I've had too.
Yeah. So I'm curious,
Yes.
what brought you to becoming an award-winning baker?
um, I wanted to be a good stepdad. And I was involved with a woman and her two children. And so I got interested at first in cooking, and then I really got interested in baking. So first I learned how to bake cookies, and that was pretty good. And then I tried to make a pie, and that wasn't very good. And my partner gave me a gift at Christmas, and it was a gift certificate for a baking school, to go to a baking school. And I went to a few classes and started to bake every day. And what I did with baking was the exact same thing I do with almost everything, and especially the way I've developed my psychic ability. And what I did with baking is I learned the fundamentals of baking. Uh, I I was really interested in pastry, and I wanted to make the best pastry that I could possibly make. So I started um, baking or making the pastry the way my grandmother did. You know, she put the flour on the table, she put the lard on the table, she put water there, and with her hands, she just put it all together, and then rolled the greatest pastry that you ever had. So I learned how to do it that way. And when I got good at baking the pastry that way, I started adding shortcuts or easier ways to do it, until eventually what I used a um, a mix master to make the pastry as well, and instead. But in a pinch, I could start right from the very fundamentals, and I was good at the fundamentals. And that's how I've done just about all of my avocations that I've had, and also how I've developed my psychic ability, or my, my intuitive side.
So did you finally figure out the key to the pies?
Oh, I got really good at baking, and I lived in this small town just outside of Toronto, and nobody knew that I was Robert Lindsy Milne, psychic, in this small town. They thought I was a pastry chef, because everywhere I went, I had my baking with me, and my partner, she took her my baking to her patients, and the girls would take my baking to school and stuff. Everybody thought I was a pastry chef. They didn't know that I was a psychic, and just baking was an avocation that I had at that time. And I also baked a lot of cakes, and I like everything, I took it to an extreme. The pantry that I had, and I was very proud that people could come to my house, and they would uh, I would ask them to, what kind of a cake would you like? And they would come up with some bizarre, unique one that, or people had never heard of, and I would have the ingredients and be able to do it, and many times just from scratch. And I baked every morning, before I drove to work and became a psychic, and I baked every night, and that's how I got to be a good pastry chef. Or I wasn't a pastry chef, a good cook. And then I went into competitions and won, and then I don't bake very much anymore.
What was your favorite dish to bake?
Oh, depending upon the time of the year. Um, I won an award from it was sponsored by a a vineyard, and the the competition was um, the best grape dessert, and I baked a um, Concord grape pie with a rich butter crust. It was absolutely spectacular. I won the award for that. I loved that a lot. Um, I really enjoyed, looking at the fruit that I had in the house at the time, and putting it together, and doing stuff like that. I liked that a lot. Um, we have something up here in Canada called butter tarts. Oh man, and I won a couple of awards for my butter tarts. When I was going into the fall fairs, the old ladies hated me. They used to. They used to break or damage my exhibits because I was beating them. They just hated me and stuff. So the
Oh,
competition was tough competition. you know
yeah, you don't expect that from,
yeah,
you watch
yeah,
the like TV programs and
sure.
like everyone's nice and cordial and being like,
Mm-hmm.
well, thank you for the opportunity to walk off, and you don't see the anger side of
That's
I
right.
can't believe I
That's
lost to
right.
this person.
That's right. That's right. So that was one of the things that I, as my one avocation. I've had many.
Right. You mentioned powerlifting as well.
That was at the same time when I was going through my baking phase also. And so I'd get up in the morning and bake, and then I'd drive to the gym and have a really heavy workout. And then I would go to the office and be a psychic again, and then go home and bake some more. And on my 49th birthday, I squatted 405 pounds for 6 reps. I leg pressed 1,000 pounds for 6 reps, and I bench pressed 265, and that was the peak of my weight of my lifting.
Wow.
It took me about 8 years to get there.
Yeah, but that's impressive.
Yes, and one of the reasons that I did it was I come from a very abused background, and I also was homeless when I was 15 years old, and I lived on the streets, surviving by my psychic ability, surviving by my instincts. And when I was younger, I was physically abused, and um, by people that were bigger than me, and I was a pretty angry person, and I was gentle most of the time, but I was a pretty angry person and I started getting now I had always been involved in physical activities. Well, there was one period I wasn't. And actually, when I was 30, when I was 33 years old, I had reached the 300-pound mark. I had gained that much weight. And by the way, I'm only about 5'6.5", 5'7" on a good, tall day. And so by the time I was about 33, I had reached the level of over 300 pounds. It wasn't muscle. And I changed my life and lost that weight, got more active again. And when I got into my 40s, I got very interested in powerlifting and getting strong. And as I was even, and I got really serious at it. And I started off having a trainer once a week. And then I started the same guy twice a week, and then 3 times a week. And then one day the trainer said he had 2 weeks holidays, and would I like to work out with him? And we did that 2 weeks, and he said, would you like to be my workout partner? You're that committed. And so my trainer I became workout partners. And over another 7 years, I had worked myself up to that level of strength. It was the peak. And in that time period, the sense of security I had, especially when I did the lift when I was 49, that I could walk down the street and pretty much pick up anybody and throw them. And to know that I was that strong, I couldn't get hurt anymore. And throughout that time that I was making myself really strong, I encountered a few of those people that physically hurt me, and explained to them they couldn't anymore.
That's a true gift.
Now I never hurt them physically.
Right.
I just let them know I could, though.
Right.
And for me, yes. and for me, that was very healing for me. And that's why I did it.
Well, that's inspiring. And I want to go back and touch on something that you had mentioned in our prior episode was, your work with the Cozy Tea Room.
Yes.
And I was curious if that work is what led to you working with the Canadian Secret Service and other agencies, or was there like a separation there?
I started working at the Cozy Tea Room in Toronto. I was 15 and a half years old. I was homeless. And now, way before that time, like 4 or 5 years old, I was having psychic experiences, not seeing spirits, just knowing things are going to happen, things are happening, just being like that. And I'd always had that sense. I'd used it at a young age as well. And actually, here's how I discovered that I was, I'd like to share this. One time, this is what it was like growing up as someone that had awareness or psychic ability. I came home from school for lunch, So I kindergarten, grade 1, so I'd be 5 years old. And so now we're in the 1950s, right? This isn't like, where everybody has a cell phone. This is 1950s. Some people don't even have telephones then. I come home from school and I say to my mother, Grandma Harris died today. Well, Grandma Harris actually was my great grandmother, and she lived in England. We lived in Toronto. I'd only ever seen her once, and I was like, and so and at this time I was like 5 or 6. Grandma Harris died today. My mother got angry with me for saying bad things. In fact, yelled at me, and good chance that she hit me too for saying that. News traveled slowly in those days. So the next night at dinner, my mother, father, my sister, and I at the table, my mother says to my father, Grandma Harris died yesterday. And I thought my dad was going to get angry with my mother for saying bad things. But they talked about it, though, instead. And nobody got into trouble about it. And those kind of things were happening to me all the time. My father, when I was about 9 years old, my father took me to an NHL semifinal Stanley Cup hockey game. Boston and Toronto were playing. The game was tied at the end of the third period. And when the team started the first overtime period, when they just sort of came on the ice to stretch a bit, I knew number 17 with his Toronto Maple Leafs was going to score. I just knew it. The game hadn't started, but I knew Gary Eman was going to score. That was it. So anyway, the referee blows the whistle and the players go to the bench. Imagine this in Maple Leaf Gardens, like 18,000 people. They turn the lights down low. The whole building's quiet. The referee is just about to drop the puck. And I couldn't hold the energy inside anymore, because not only was Gary Eman going to score. This guy wasn't even on the ice at the time. He wasn't even a first stringer. But not only was he going to score, it felt like he already had scored. So here we are, and I jump up and start screaming and cheering in this building, 18,000 people, and everybody turned and looked at me and my dad. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, sit down. And I did. And I did. And the referee drops the puck, game starts. And I was sitting there, thinking, oh, like I was real. Now I was 9, so it's hard to, put all this together right now at 74. So anyway, a couple of minutes later, Gary Eman comes on the ice. He starts skating down towards the net. A guy named Red Kelly passes the puck to Gary Eman. Eman tips the puck in the net, scores the winning overtime goal, and the entire building goes crazy. Screaming, yelling, cheering. It's just unbelievable. And I just sat there and watched. And like the flashlights were going and people were screaming, and I just realized that I was different. And that's when I knew other people saw things, didn't see things the way I saw. And that's when I became aware. Now, I wasn't always as honorable. So I just have to have, there's a bit of an amendment to this as well. And incidentally, my father, to his dying day, which was just like 2 or 3 years ago, believed that his only son was a fraud and a charlatan. He just believed that. And he never believed it. So when I was like 9, 10 years old, my sister and I, we had an allowance. We used to get 25 cents a week for an allowance. And we would get that quarter, and we would go to the Fox Theater, and for a quarter you'd get in the movies, and there'd be like 2 feature full lengths, and I think there's like 3 big cartoons and a serial movie as well. Box of popcorn, a big drink of I think Americans call it soda. We call it pop here, and they also and a bag of candy. Like, so the night that Eamon scored was a Thursday, and the next game was the Saturday, and that was when we got our allowance. And on Saturday morning, when Gail and I went to my father to get our allowance, I said to my dad, Boston's going to win tonight. And my dad said, no. And I said, I bet you a quarter. That's my allowance, right? I said, I bet you a quarter that they do. And he took the bet. Boston won that night, and I doubled my allowance. And I hustled my dad for several years with that. I got so good at it, I had to let him win sometimes. I thought I was going to get caught. So that was what I thought about in terms of psychic things when I was 5 or 8 or 10, and it was also how I learned to survive when I was on the street. Learning how to use my skills or abilities on how to survive.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I imagine anyone in that position would do the same thing.
Now, I never, ever, when I was homeless, living in an alleyway and stuff. Well, I didn't live in an alleyway. I was too smart. But when I was homeless in the wintertime, I was when I was always taken care of or knew how to take care of myself. And when I was in trouble, I was always offered the opportunity to solve a problem using my psychic intuitive instincts or abilities, or an illegal or an immoral way of solving it. I almost always chose the psychic or the intuitive way. I never solved it in an illegal way. I did on occasion solve it in an immoral way. Sometimes children have to do things to stay alive. But I never, ever stole anything or used my psychic ability in a way that would dishonor it. And I always, even as a kid, after I realized what I could do or what I was doing, I always have had a respect for the awareness I've had.
Right. And that makes sense. And
Yeah.
I like Flicks Love's comment. He says, I love how Robert speaks with so much love about it all. Inspirational. And he says, passion for life. That's it.
Well, I've been in, I've done this. My calling, you know, I keep saying it, like I was 15 and a half years old when I started at the tea room, and I've been doing this now for 59 years, and I've been around the world. I was the first Canadian psychic to appear and do call-in psychic shows on radio and TV. I was the first Canadian to tour across Canada and then into the U.S. and then in almost all of the other English-speaking countries. It's been what it's been what I chose to make my life be. The reason I was hesitating is because, you know, I could have done other things as well, but no, I could have done other things but I chose this. And when I contacted the Cozy Tea Room, it was, you know, it was a cold January day. And I heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room and doing tea leaf and card readings, if you worked there in the afternoon, first of all, you'd get a sandwich, a cup of tea, and cookies. And then you would get to do some tea leaf and card readings and get paid at the end of the shift. And if you worked there in the evening, you got a hot dinner, cup of tea and cookies, and you got paid at the end of the night. So I phoned, I went down to the Cozy Tea, and by the way, it was a dump. I went down to the Cozy Tea Room and I applied. So how do you apply to get a job as, well, you do a reading for the owner of the tea room. And you had to do tea leaf. I had never done a tea leaf reading in my life. I had never really heard of doing tea leaf readings. And I had to do, so what I did is there was a teacup and there were tea leaves in the bottom of the cup. And I held the cup in front of my, like this. And I put it between my eyes and I was looking at Mrs. Cox. That's what Mrs. Cox was the owner. And I held the teacup in my hands and looked at Mrs. Cox. And I pretended I was looking at the tea leaves. And then I just used my psychic ability and told her about her and did my, 15-year-old, shtick as a psychic. And then I had to do a card reading. I had never done a card reading. We didn't even have cards in the house I lived in. So I just looked at the cards, handed them to her, and I said, shuffle the cards, because I didn't know. So she shuffled the cards, and put them down on the table, and I just put some down on the table. And I pointed to a card and then just looked at her and did my psychic thing with her again. And I was pointing to the cards and, making it as if I was, doing a card reading. And I was just using my psychic instinct. And I got the job that day.
I love how you were able to emulate exactly something you have never seen or done. And that everybody was like, oh, he's really doing it.
He was really doing it, and the tools that others used, I didn't. So I was using my pure abilities, and in order to survive, I had to pretend I was doing it the way they did in the tea room rather than doing it the way I do it.
Right. And That's what I mean. It was
Yeah.
that you were able to make it look like you were doing a card reading, even though
Yes.
you had never done a card reading, but
Yeah.
you knew how to make it look like.
Yeah.
And I think that's brilliant
Survival.
that you had
Yeah.
that.
Well, my family on my mother's side were horse traders, horse dealers, and used car salespeople, and I believe there is a little bit of gypsy blood in our background, and I, this is a joke. I have, it's a curse sometimes. It's like I have the blood of a gypsy running through my veins, and the curse is I can see where the scams can be. The curse is I have a conscience and can't do it. So I see it. I can see all the scores, but I just can't do it because it goes against my moral values. And I have cousins that drove around in Ferraris and lived in mansions, and they didn't have the conscience side that I have. So it was like a curse and a blessing at the same time. So what it really was is my ability to survive, to do what I needed to do. And that's how I go about doing psychic readings, by the way. And the way I go about psychic readings is I don't care how I get the answer. What I'm interested in is getting the answer. And it doesn't matter how I do it. So if I were taking a math exam and I looked at the math, or the exam, and just put all the answers on the page and then turned it in, the professor wouldn't pass me, because in a math exam, you need to show them why you get the answer that you do. In my job, you get the points for getting the answer. So I don't put labels on them. I don't put, I don't say I'm clairvoyant or clairsentient or an empath. I look for the answer. And what I often teach my students is become aware of what's obvious. And when you become aware of what's obvious, then more becomes obvious. And when you become aware that's more obvious, then you get to a point where what's obvious to you is not obvious to others. And that's the first stages of developing and expanding one's psychic ability. And so instead of worrying about whether you're remote viewing or whether you're being a telepath, just give them the bloody answer. Just get to the point. And that's how I've always done it. So often I've been involved with finding lost people. Most of them were dead. I for a couple of years worked with the RCMP security service. I had direct contact with a KGB agent. I was instrumental in interfering with and breaking up an intelligence ring between Cuba, Canada, and Germany. and psychically I exposed that. Um,
What was that like, going through all of that to expose?
it was like doing a psychic reading. It was like it was um well it was fun, but it was what I was meant to do. And um it was the way my life has been. And I've taken my awareness, pushed it to my limit or its limit. Well, maybe I haven't. Maybe I could do more. But what I thought it was my limit. Um, can I just go back a little bit? Maybe I can explain it. Okay, so I left. I was at the tea room for 6 years, and in that time, I worked every day, 5 days a week, sometimes 6 days a week, and then sometimes I would do private parties on Sundays. That's how much I did readings. When I was 21, I heard that when a young man becomes a priest, they make a vow that they will do that they would say a mass every day of their life. I decided that this would be my calling. Therefore, I would either do a psychic reading or practice being psychic every day of my life. And I managed to either do a psychic reading or practice every day for very close to 32 years without missing a day of that. It's been that kind of commitment. When I left the tea room at around 21, I was living in a flea bag hotel, barely making a living. And I was thinking about what can I do to bring customers in or people to get readings from me? What could I do? And now remember, this is like in the 1970s, different world. And incidentally, the hotel I was living at had one of those old-fashioned phones where you pick it up and the operator dials it for you. Anyway, I was thinking, could I do readings on the telephone? Nobody had done that, by the way. So I started calling my friends, practicing doing psychic readings on the telephone. And I did that for several months every day. And then I got my friends to give me their friends' names. And their friends knew I was going to call. And I would, again, practice doing psychic readings. And then I just spread my name around, saying, if you want to have a psychic reading, call me at, Larry's Hideaway Hotel. That was where I was staying, Larry's Hideaway Hotel. And call me. And so, like 3:00 in the morning, the phone rang. Hey, this is Joe. What can you tell me? And, I'd be asleep and, wake up and go from asleep to awake and do some readings and then go back to sleep again. And it was like that. And then one day I said, how are you going to get paid? And I thought, oh, And now this was back, we're in early 70s and people didn't have credit cards. Like credit cards? Like what? They just weren't around. And nobody would have given me one in those days or let me be a Visa merchant. So I thought, if I can do readings on the telephone, could I do readings on the telephone on the radio? And I thought, Only one way to find out. So there's this small city outside of Toronto in the north. Are we running out of time by any chance, Michael? I notice you're a bit impatient.
Oh no, I'm enjoying listening to the story.
Okay. So remember, I was about 24, 25 maybe a bit younger. Anyway, so there was a small town, a small city just outside of Toronto called Aurelia, and a friend of mine lived there. Actually, a lot of people from that city, small city, went on to become like famous actors or politicians. Or anyway, friend of mine lived there, and I asked her if there was a radio station in the town, and she told me there was, and the radio station was it'll come to me, sorry. Anyway, it was I can't remember the call letters. And anyway, it was this little rinky-dink radio station, and the morning man, the talk show host, and the program director was the same guy, and his name was Rusty Draper, and he was a kind of like a bulldogish kind of guy, kind of curt and short to the temper, short to the point and direct. And I phoned him and said, my name is, in those days, I called myself Bob Milne. And just at this point, I said, this is Robert, by the way, Robert Lindsy Milne is my name. And I said to the guy, my name is Robert Lindsy Milne, and, I can come on your radio show, and your callers can call in, and I can do psychic readings. And he said to me, if you can do what you say you can do, you're on my show tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. No, sorry, not 10 after 9. And if you can't do what you say you can do, you're off my show at 20 after 9. Other than that, come on up. If you're okay with that, come on up. And I said, okay. And now the radio show, this radio station, they usually broadcast from there, except their talk show was broadcast from hotels, and I'm just trying again. It was a chain of hotels, and it was broadcast from the dining room, because this restaurant or the hotel was having trouble getting customers to come to the dining room to have food. So they started broadcasting the talk show live from the dining room. So the day before, it was Howard Johnson's, by the way. The day before, I spoke to Rusty, and he said, come on up. You're on my show tomorrow morning. I didn't have any money. I mean, like when I said I didn't have any money, like zero, like nothing. And Aurelia is about 100 miles north of Toronto. And I hitchhiked to Aurelia. And there's a lake that Aurelia is on, and it's Lake Couchiching. And I slept in the park that night. And the next morning, I swam in the Lake Couchiching, for my bath. And I then got dried off and went down to the Holiday Inn to be on the radio and find out if I could do phone calls and be psychic. And so I must have looked a little scruffy, but at first, when I got there, they were wondering, who's this guy? And I said, I was with Rusty Draper in the show. when I found the dining room, I just saw them setting up the broadcast, and there was nobody in the restaurant other than that. And we go on the air, and Rusty says to me, "So if you're so darn psychic, I don't know if you're so darn psychic, what can you tell me about me?" And I said to him, "I'm thinking of someone's name, Richards or Richard's son, and he has red hair in a briefcase." And Rusty looked at me and he said, "Nobody knows that." And he just changed the subject. And then he said, "Can you do calls?" And like, "Oh, sure." And we started doing calls. And about 20 minutes into the show, people, now again, this had never been done in Canada. Like, we didn't know about these things. I had never done this before. And people started coming into the hotel, and they came up to the microphone and asked questions and stuff. And by about 9:45, the place was packed. And I saw Rusty talking to a guy off, during a commercial break, and he came back and said, "Can you stay another hour?" And I said, "Oh, sure, I can." So, because I was only supposed to be on between 9 and 10. So then by about 10:15, there's a lineup outside the restaurant. And then the place is completely packed, and everybody's buying food and drinking and coming up to the microphone and calling in. And then I see they're having another conversation at about 11:15. And then Rusty says, "Can you stay till can you stay to 11?" I say, "Sure." And we go on. And now they clear the room because there were just so many people out in the hallway, and they fill the room again. And this now, and everything was like a blur for me. And it's starting to run out of gas. And at about 20 to 12, I said to Rusty, I can't go on anymore. I'm done. And at the end of the show, I stood up, and all of a sudden I got completely swarmed. And my brain was full or empty from all that had gone on. I was really tired, and all these people were surrounding me. And I understand that was the way it was feeling, only there were a lot more of them going. And everybody was screaming and asking questions, and I just could, I was just overwhelmed. And all of a sudden, like two guys, one guy grabs one arm and one guy grabs the other, and they pull me away and down where the offices are. And one was Rusty, and the other one was the owner of Howard Johnson's hotel. And we get in the office, and this was like a blur at this time for me. And Rusty says, "Could you stay over another, tonight and be on tomorrow?" And I said, I can't. I have to be honest. I hitchhiked up here. I swam in the lake, slept in the park last night, and I'm tired, and I haven't eaten since yesterday, and I just want to go home. I'm hungry, and I just want to go home. The guy that owned Howard Johnson said, "Oh, well, we can take care of that." And I said, oh, okay. And Rusty said, do you do readings? And back in Toronto. And I said, oh yeah, sure. And in those days I was charging $5 a reading, right? And so Rusty says, well, if you can stay over and be on the show tomorrow, we could get one of the girls, right, at the radio station. They could book appointments for you. And I said, oh, great. And Rusty said, how much do you charge? And I said, $25. And he said, oh, you're never going to get that here. And I said, I don't care. Because I was going to be sleeping at Howard Johnson's. And the owner had already said, if I stay and do readings, I could stay there as long as I want. And I was a guest at the hotel, like, I was there free. So anyway, the next day we did the show. And they booked 125 readings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, at $25 a reading. And I had no expenses. And when I started doing I was there about 10 days. And the money just started coming in, and more and more and more. And I started thinking to myself, how am I going to get home? Because I'm not going to be hitchhiking. And I thought, oh, I could take the bus. And then another day later, now remember, I was like 24 or something. Another day or two later, well, okay, you could take the train. It's okay. Then another day was, well, you could take a cab. And I said, yeah, I could do that. And each day that wad in my pocket just kept getting bigger and bigger. And about 2 days before, it was about the 8th day, I thought, I wonder if I could fly home. So I phoned the Aurelia airport. They didn't have a big airport, and Air Canada wasn't landing there. And but the guy said that they had charter flights, Cessnas, to downtown Toronto at Toronto Island Airport. And he said that would be $100. So that was just doing 4 readings. And so the way I got home was I flew back in a single engine Cessna in a charter, and I took a cab to my place. It was a dive, and the next day I went out and got a newspaper, and I went to a restaurant and sat down, and I went through the want ads, and I looked at furnished apartments for rent. And I took a cab to one apartment building, and I went in. It was a 1-bedroom apartment, and it was furnished. And I paid 6 months rent in advance. And I went back to the dive I was staying at and put everything I could get in the cab from the apartment, and took it to my new place. And that's how I became a performing psychic, because I started calling radio stations and telling them what I did with Rusty, and that's how I started doing that.
No, that's an amazing story, and what a gift that the hotel and radio station, challenged you in such a way of going, one, like Rusty saying, you're not going to get that, and then you just
I didn't care.
did it wrong, and The hotel was like, hey, we're willing
Well,
to help you.
being honest, it wasn't so much proving him wrong. You know, Johnson's was like being in a palace compared to the dive I was living in. So,
Right.
okay, so all right, if I'm not going to get it, I don't have to pay tonight or tomorrow. I don't care then if I'm not going
Right.
to get
And
it.
I didn't mean proving him wrong. I just meant
Yeah.
that life itself proved him wrong and you got
Sure.
more than what they were anticipating.
Yes, we all did. I was talking to, now that was more than 50 years ago. And I was talking with Rusty about 5 years ago. I said hello. He remembered me.
Oh, I'm sure that would be hard to forget. Somebody just walking in and having 125.
Yeah. And filling the hotel,
Yeah.
the restaurant. It was an amazing experience. I've had a lot of amazing experiences, and incidentally, both ways. You know, I've had those glorious ones. I've had the odd crash or two as well.
So, how do you recover from the crash? Do you just tell yourself, "Hey, it was just a bad day. Tomorrow will be different," or what do you
Just
do for yourself?
get up and do it. At this age, so 74, what I've seen in life and how I see it now is quite different than, say, 50 years ago. How I see life, the purpose of life is to experience. That's it. So the purpose of life is to experience all things on all levels. And we have free choice and free will to experience anything we want. There's a couple of clauses that go with that, though. We have free choice and free will to experience anything what we want. However, what we do one way, we must and will do equally the opposite. So whatever you do this way, you will do the opposite. And then the other rule is, on this planet, in this solar system, in this galaxy that we're in, we're accountable. So we're accountable for our behavior, but we can do it if we want anything. So if you see life like that, what we do one way, we do equally the opposite. That and the purpose of life is to experience, then you can't ruin your life, because you're here to experience. And what you do one way, you're going to do the opposite. And because you're experiencing, you can't ruin it. You can make it different, but you can't ruin it, because you're here to experience. And you will do the opposite. And incidentally, often everywhere in between as well. That also means you can't fail, because that's the experience too, right? So you're here for that experience, right? So, and here's another one, is what we are one way, we are also the opposite. As good as we are, as bad as we are, as determined as we are, as lazy as we are, as accomplished as we can be, as much a failure we can be. We already are both sides. So the purpose also is to be balanced. So you can't fail. You can't ruin your life. And you can always make it different. That's what I think.
And you just blew me away with that, because I was like, that is the most beautiful, insightful, inspirational way I have ever really heard that put. And it makes total sense. And it's like, your mind, there's like no way you can trap your mind in getting into that trap of, oh, I failed at this, so maybe I should leave this. It's built into it. So it's like, okay, so today was a bad day, brush it off. Tomorrow will be better, or could be the same. It is what it is.
Some of the greatest lessons have been the result of me falling on my ass. Some of the greatest lessons I've learned was when I got beat up, not necessarily physically, but yeah, even that. So some of the greatest lessons I've learned is in failure. One of my teachers had a saying, an expression. The greatest barrier to personal growth is uninterrupted success. So the greatest barrier to personal growth is uninterrupted success, because after a while, you stop working at it.
Right, you start to ride your coattails, so to speak.
Absolutely. That's when the champion gets knocked out, 8, 9, 10. That's when it happens. And think of some times.
While you do that, it reminds me of that quote from the movie Batman Begins.
Oh yeah,
where Dad picks him up when he falls down the well, and he says, "Why do we fall? So we learn to get back up."
Yes. So here's another way that I say, what we are one way, we are equally the opposite, and balance is the key to power. And then I say, we have to be, there has to be two sides of us. Have you ever seen a one-sided line? You can't have a one-sided line. So if you are this side, you have to be on you have to have another side. But here's another thing. No matter how small that line is, there are two sides in the middle. It's always like that too.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I just realized we're at an hour and 16 minutes, so I apologize. We ran over the hour. But man, I am so struck by that it's like my mind is like, I can't think of a question or a comment to go with it. It's like my mind is like, this is the perfect way to end this, because that is just so insightful and so, I think, necessary that everyone, I hope, hears that and understands what is being said and resonates with them, because that is a truly powerful statement and insight to have.
It's very simple.
And they always say the best things in life are the simplest, and we always like to make them harder. And
oh yeah.
But I want to thank you for coming on and indulging me with some more of these questions. And I hope that you had fun on this
Yes, I did.
episode.
It is fun. I did have fun. Don't I look like I was having fun?
I was having a lot of fun, and I just there are moments that it's like I rarely get awestruck by what people say, but you, I have to say, got me truly awestruck a couple of times to where I was like, my mind had to finish processing what you were saying and catch up because it was like, wow, it was just stuff I needed to hear.
I'm glad. Thank you, Michael. Um, I'm touched. Thank you. Um, it's simple stuff. Um, I I do a lot of thinking in those areas. I think about that stuff a lot. You could have me back another time. I talk about other things too.
I'd love to have you back on again, and um, that would be such a blessing. And I want to thank everyone in the chat room and who was commenting or we did have one question. I didn't bring it up because we were in the stories and it was someone was asking questions for a reading, and I simply commented into the chat room, if you want a reading to contact you directly, that's the best
Yes.
way to do that.
Yes. Oh, are you? So is this when I give out my contact info? Is that the lead? Is that where
Yes.
you? Oh, okay. So Robert Lindsy Milne, you can find me on my website, www.robertlindsymilne.com. You can also find me on Apple, Spotify, iHeart. You can find me on Facebook, Messenger, but www.robertlindsymilne.com is probably the easiest way. And give
And
me a call.
yeah, and do you want to give a quick shout out to your podcast show?
Oh, yeah. Thanks a lot. Yes. I also have my own podcast, which is called My Side of the Crystal Ball. And it's doing pretty good. And there's at least one in every episode I talk about, well, like I did a little talk with you tonight, Michael, and that's called WWRS. What would Robert say for that segment? And then we have an expert in just about every field around, and we talk about really interesting and evolved things. So my side of the crystal ball, and you can find it anywhere you listen to or see your podcasts.
Thank you for that, and I highly recommend checking it out. And thank you again for coming on. And to all of our fans out there, have a blessed day, blessed afternoon, blessed evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for watching, as always, and have a great weekend. Bye bye, everyone.
You have just listened to The Energy That Surrounds Us with your host, Michael Kopf. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.